7 at night. The kitchen lights were dim, steam curled up from the sink, and Seraphine Hale was crying. Quietly, carefully. Then the door closed behind her, and a voice, calm, cold, dangerously low, said, "Who did this to you?" She didn't turn around. And he added, "And don't insult me with a lie." The maid didn't know who owned that kitchen. She was about to find out. Silence. That was the first thing you would have noticed if you had been standing in the kitchen of Ronan Vale's penthouse that night. Not the kind of silence that meant peace. The kind that meant someone was trying very hard not to be heard. The overhead lights had been dimmed to a low amber glow. Steam curled from the sink in slow, ghostly ribbons. The faucet dripped, once, twice, each drop loud enough to echo off the Italian marble countertops. And Seraphine Hale stood at the edge of that sink, with her shoulders trembling. She gripped the counter with both hands, knuckles bone white, and she pressed her lips together so tightly they'd lost all color. Her eyes were closed, her jaw was clenched, and a single tear, just one, slid down her cheek and fell into the dishwater without a sound. She thought she was alone. She had waited until every member of the household staff had clocked out. She had waited until the security rotation changed. She had waited until the penthouse fell quiet. And only then, did she allow herself to break. But Seraphine Hale had made one critical mistake. She forgot who owned the silence in this house. The heavy kitchen door closed behind her, not slammed, not rushed, closed, with the kind of slow, deliberate precision that made the click of the latch sound like a verdict. Footsteps, measured, unhurried, the leather soles of handmade Oxfords on cold stone, and then a voice, low, calm, dangerously quiet. "Who did this to you?" Seraphine didn't move. Her fingers tightened on the counter, her breath caught in her throat like a trapped bird. The footsteps stopped 3 feet behind her, close enough to feel, far enough to give her room. Calculated like everything else about the man who owned this kitchen, this building, and, according to most people in the city, several blocks surrounding it. Ronan Vale stood in the doorway of his own kitchen at 11:47 at night, wearing a charcoal suit with the top button undone, his dark hair pushed back, his pale blue eyes fixed on the back of the woman who had been silently falling apart in his home. He didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to, but after a long, aching pause, he added, almost gently, "And don't insult me with a lie." Seraphine's first instinct was to wipe her face. Her second instinct was to apologize. Both instincts were born from years of training, not the kind that came from finishing school or good parenting, but the kind that came from learning exactly how to make yourself smaller when someone powerful walked into the room. She reached for the dish towel beside the sink and pressed it to her cheeks, turning just enough to show him her profile but not her eyes. "It's nothing, Mr. Vale. I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone was still. I didn't ask for an apology." His voice was the same temperature as before. "What's a room temperature? Precise. I asked you a question." She finally turned, and there he was, Ronan Vale, 34 years old, 6'2", built like a man who had learned to fight before he learned to read. Irish-American lineage that showed in the sharp cut of his jaw and the pale, unblinking clarity of his eyes. He owned 4 restaurants in Manhattan, high-end places where a reservation took 3 months, and a cancellation fee cost more than most people's rent. But the restaurants were a front. Everyone in certain circles knew that, and the circles Ronan moved in were the kind where knowing too much was a liability, and saying too little was a survival skill. He was not a man who asked idle questions, and he was not a man who repeated them twice. Seraphine swallowed. "I was just finishing up the kitchen. I'll be out of your way in—" "Sit down." It wasn't a request, but it also wasn't cruel. That was the part that confused her. The words carried weight, but not the kind of weight she was used to. Not the kind that made her flinch. She hesitated. Ronan pulled a chair away from the small kitchen island. Not for himself. For her. He set it down without scraping the floor. Precise. Controlled. Then he stepped back and leaned against the opposite counter, arms folded loosely. He didn't sit, not yet. He gave her the lower position first, the seated position, so she wouldn't have to look up at him from the floor if her legs gave out. And then he did something that Seraphine Hale did not expect from a man like Ronan Vale. He sat on the counter, not in a chair, not in the tall stool, on the counter itself, legs hanging, posture relaxed, so that his eyes were level with hers instead of above them. It was such a small thing, such a quiet, deliberate thing. But it rearranged the entire architecture of the room. She was no longer a maid standing before her employer. She was a person sitting across from another person, and that shift, that tiny gravitational adjustment, was what finally cracked her. Composure. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice broke on the second word, and they both heard it. Ronan didn't react. He simply watched her, not with impatience, not with pity, with the calm, focused attention of a man who had spent his entire adult life reading people, their tells, their lies, their breaking points. He noticed things. The faint, yellowish bruise on the inside of her left wrist, old, fading, almost invisible beneath the sleeve of her uniform. The way she flinched when a pot lid slid off the drying rack and clanged against the counter. The way her eyes darted toward the closed door, not toward it as an exit, but toward it as a barrier. She wasn't afraid of being in this room. She was afraid of what might come through the door. "How long?" he asked quietly. She blinked. "How long what? How long have you been afraid of closed doors?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Ripples spread across her expression. Surprise first, then denial, then something deeper and more dangerous. Recognition. Because no one had ever asked her that before. Not her mother, not her friends, not her therapist, not a single person in 22 years of living had looked at her and seen the exact shape of the thing she was hiding. And this man she had worked for in near total silence for the past 4 months, had seen it in under 60 seconds. Her lower lip trembled. She pressed her teeth into it, hard. "I don't—" She trailed off, started again. "It's not what you think." Ronan tilted his head slightly. "Then correct me." She didn't speak for a long time. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. The kitchen clock ticked softly. The steam from the sink had faded. The room felt like a held breath. And then Seraphine Hale made a decision that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. She told him the truth. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. "I was engaged," she said. Her voice was flat. Now, controlled, detached. The way people speak when they've rehearsed something so many times. The words lose their edges. "His name was Graham. Graham Ashford. He's an investor. Venture capital. Very successful. Very connected. Very—" She paused. "Charming," she finished. But the word tasted like rust. Ronan said nothing. His face didn't change, but his fingers, resting on the edge of the counter, went still. "He was charming in public," Seraphine continued, staring at a point on the floor between her shoes. "He knew everyone's name. He remembered birthdays. He sent flowers to his mother every Sunday. People loved him. People respected him. People said I was lucky." She looked up then, and her eyes were dry, which was worse than tears somehow. Dry eyes meant she had cried about this so many times there was nothing left. "And in private," she said slowly, "he controlled everything. My phone, my bank accounts, who I spoke to, where I went, what I wore. He checked my location every 15 minutes. He read my texts while I slept. He told me it was because he loved me. He told me that's what love looked like, paying attention." She let out a sound that was almost a laugh. "Almost. And when I disagreed, when I pushed back even once, he didn't hit me. He never hit me, not where anyone could see. He'd grip my wrist, hard, and he'd say very calmly, very quietly." She swallowed. "You're confused. Let me help you think clearly. The kitchen went very, very still. Ronan's jaw tightened, just once, just barely. If you weren't watching closely, you would have missed it entirely. But Seraphine wasn't watching. She was staring at the floor again, lost in the geography of a memory she had tried for months to leave behind. He told me that if I left, she continued, he would make sure no one believed me. He said he had recordings, conversations taken out of context, texts he'd written from my phone to make it look like I was unstable. He said he'd send them to my family, to my graduate program, to anyone who mattered. She paused, then, quietly. He said he owned my reputation, and without that, I was nothing. Ronan was silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, not louder, not angrier, colder, the way a lake looks when it freezes from the bottom up. Still on the surface, lethal underneath. Graham Ashford. It wasn't a question. Seraphine looked up, startled. You know him? Ronan didn't blink. He has business ties to people I know. The words were careful, vague, but Seraphine wasn't naive. She had spent 4 months in this house. She had seen the men in dark suits who came and went without appointments. She had heard the phone calls, brief, coded, always ending with, "It's handled." She knew on some level she refused to examine too closely that Ronan Vale was not simply a restaurant owner. And now the man who had tormented her, the Atio, man who had hollowed out her identity and worn it like a mask, was connected to the world this man lived in. The realization hit her like cold water. I should go, she said, standing abruptly. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. This was unprofessional. Sit down, Seraphine. It was the first time he had ever used her first name, not Ms. Hale, not the kitchen girl, which is what most of his associates called her, when they didn't think she was listening. Her name, spoken with a weight that made it feel like something worth carrying. She sat, and Ronan Vale looked at her, really looked at her, with an expression she had never seen on his face in 4 months of watching him from across rooms. It wasn't pity. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. As if he had just realized that the woman who had been quietly cleaning his kitchen every night was fighting a war he hadn't noticed. And that bothered him, not because he cared about appearances, but because he had always prided himself on seeing everything. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me his name again, he said softly, and I'll decide what happens next. And that was the moment the air in the room changed, not because he raised his voice, not because he made a threat, but because Seraphine Hale looked into the pale blue eyes of Ronan Vale and understood for the first time in years what it felt like when someone dangerous was dangerous on your behalf. The next 72 hours passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Seraphine returned to work the following morning expecting what? A summons. A cold shoulder. The polite fiction that nothing had happened, the way powerful men usually handled uncomfortable truths. Instead, she found a new lock on the kitchen entrance, a digital one with a code only she and the head of household security knew. When she asked about it, the security chief, a broad-shouldered man named Declan, who had the personality of a filing cabinet, simply said, Mr. Vale's orders. No further explanation. Seraphine's morning routine continued as usual. She arrived at 6. She prepared the espresso. She set out the kitchen for the morning chef. She wiped the counters, restocked the pantry, and organized the cold storage. She did these things with the same quiet efficiency she had maintained for 4 months. But something had changed. She noticed it in small ways. The other staff members, the 2 housekeepers, the morning cook, the laundry attendant, they treated her differently. Not with suspicion, but with a kind of deference she hadn't earned, as if someone had quietly told them that Seraphine Hale was no longer just the kitchen maid. She was under protection. She didn't know what to do with that. Ronan, for his part, was invisible for 3 days. This was not unusual. He often disappeared into the study on the top floor or left the penthouse entirely for meetings that lasted from dusk until dawn. He was a man who operated in absences. You felt his presence most keenly when he wasn't there, because the machinery he had built continued to move without him, precise and self-sustaining. But on the fourth morning he appeared in the kitchen. It was 6:15. The espresso machine was hissing. Seraphine was slicing lemons for the water carafe. Thin, even slices, each one identical, because she had learned a long time ago that controlling small things helped when you couldn't control anything else. She heard him before she saw him. The soft creak of the hallway floor. The pause at the threshold. Not hesitation, but assessment. He was reading the room before he entered it, the way he always did. "Good morning," he said. She didn't startle. She had trained herself out of startling, the way soldiers train themselves not to flinch at gunfire. But her knife slowed. "Good morning, Mr. Vale." He walked to the espresso machine and poured himself a cup. Black, no sugar. Leaned against the counter. His counter, the same spot where he'd sat that night. And he watched her work. Silence. Not uncomfortable. Not loaded. The kind of silence that happens when two people are sharing a room without pretending the other one isn't there. After a full minute, he said, "I looked into him." Seraphine's knife stopped. "Graham Ashford," Ronan continued, his voice level. "Stanford MBA, founder of Ashford Capital Partners. Net worth approximately 340 million, depending on the day and the market. Lives on the Upper East Side. Serves on the board of two nonprofits, both related to domestic violence prevention." He let that last detail land. Seraphine's hands were trembling. She set the knife down carefully. "The domestic violence boards," she said quietly. "He joined those after I left. His publicist said it showed personal growth and commitment to accountability." "It shows camouflage," Ronan said. "The most dangerous predators always wear the skin of their prey's protectors." He set his espresso cup on the counter. "I also found out something else." She waited. "He's been looking for you." The air in the kitchen turned thin. Seraphine felt it. The way the oxygen seemed to contract. The way her lungs tightened. The way her vision narrowed to a pinpoint. Oh, she had felt this before, many times. The onset of a panic she had learned to swallow. "He hired a private investigator," Ronan continued, his tone unchanged, factual, almost clinical. "3 weeks ago. The investigator hasn't traced you here yet. Your employment paperwork was processed under a different administrative structure, which bought you time. But he's narrowing the grid." Seraphine gripped the counter. "How do you know this?" "Because I have better investigators." He said it the way someone might say they had a better brand of coffee. "And because when someone connected to my business associates starts searching for a woman inside my household, I take a professional interest." She stared at him. "Professional?" "Yes." The word hung between them. Both of them knew it was incomplete, but neither of them said so. Seraphine exhaled. It was shaky but controlled. She had practice. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing." She blinked. "Nothing. You come to work. You leave at your scheduled time. You do not change your routine, your route, or your behavior. You do not contact him. You do not respond if he contacts you. And you do not, under any circumstances, leave this building without informing Declan." It sounded like an order. It felt like something else. "And what are you going to do?" she asked. Ronan picked up his espresso, took a slow sip, set it down. "I'm going to make sure he stops looking." He said it calmly. The way you'd say, "I'm going to take out the recycling." And then he left the kitchen, and Seraphine stood alone in the silence, and she realized, with a clarity that frightened her, that she did not feel afraid. For the first time in 18 months, the fear was gone, and she didn't know what to do with the space it left behind. The days that followed existed in a strange twilight. Seraphine continued her work with the same meticulous care, but now she moved through the penthouse with a heightened awareness. Every sound meant something. Every closed door carried a question she was afraid to ask. She learned things, not because anyone told her, but because she was intelligent and observant, and had spent 2 years with a man who taught her, inadvertently, to read every micro-expression like a survival manual. She learned that Ronan ate alone, always. Even when associates were in the house, he took his meals separately, a plate in the study or a bowl of something simple, standing at the kitchen counter after midnight. She learned that he read physical books, philosophy mostly, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus. Once she found a dog-eared copy of a collection of letters on Stoic ethics tucked between the espresso machine and the wall. She learned that he spoke on the phone in 3 different registers: business voice, clipped, efficient; associate voice, low, guarded; and a third voice she heard only once, warm, almost tender, when he called someone he addressed simply as Ma. And she learned, though no one said it directly, that Ronan Vale had a rule. An absolute, unbreakable rule that everyone in his organization understood. No harm to women. No exceptions. No circumstances. No negotiations. The rule was not born from chivalry. It was born from something older and darker and far more personal. Something that lived in the locked rooms of his history, that even his closest associates knew better than to approach. Seraphine didn't know the source, but she understood the weight, because she carried her own version of it. On the 6th day, it happened. Seraphine was in the pantry, cataloging the dry goods delivery, when her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting a text from the grocery supplier. Instead, she saw a message from an unknown number. 4 words. "I know you're there." Her hands went cold, her vision tunneled. She pressed her back against the pantry shelves and slid to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, the phone clutched in her hand like a grenade. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she didn't call for help. She went silent. That was the part people never understood about survivors of psychological abuse. The response wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite. It was a complete, systemic shutdown, a retreat into the smallest possible version of yourself, because that's the version that was hardest to hurt. She sat on the floor of that pantry for 4 minutes, breathing, counting, pressing her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger, not to harm, but to anchor, to remind herself that she existed in a body, in a room, in a building that was not his. On the 5th minute, she stood up. She walked to the intercom panel near the kitchen entrance. She pressed the button labeled Security, and she said very calmly, "I need to speak with Mr. Vale." 12 minutes later, Ronan was in the kitchen. He read the text message. His expression didn't change. Not a flicker, not a twitch. He set the phone on the counter face down, the way you'd set down a card you didn't want anyone else to see. "This number," he said. "Is it his?" "It's a new one. He rotates them. He's done it before." Ronan nodded once. Then he pulled out his own phone, made a single call, and said 6 words. "Trace this. Priority. Report to me." He hung up. Then he looked at Seraphine. "You did the right thing," he said, and for a moment, just a moment, his voice wasn't cold. It wasn't controlled. It was warm, and it was certain, and it was the first time in longer than she could remember that someone had told her she had done the right thing, and she believed them. It was 3 days later when Graham Ashford made the mistake that would define the rest of his life. He came to the building, not to the penthouse. He didn't have access, but to the lobby. At 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, a man in a tailored navy overcoat walked through the revolving door of the residential tower on East 74th Street, approached the front desk, and asked, with a smile that could charm the paint-off walls, to be connected to the penthouse unit. The concierge, well-trained and well-paid, told him there was no penthouse resident by the name he provided. Graham Ashford smiled wider. "That's all right," he said. "She knows I'm here. Just let her know Graham stopped by. Tell her I brought her favorite flowers." He set a bouquet of white peonies on the counter. Then he turned and left. The concierge reported it immediately. The building's surveillance system, which Ronan had personally upgraded when he purchased the unit, captured everything. The angle of the entrance, the walk, the smile, the flowers, the way Graham glanced up at the exterior cameras on his way out. He knew the cameras were there. He wanted to be seen. That was the point. Ronan watched the footage at 11 p.m. in the security room on the 41st floor. Declan stood behind him. Two other men, associates whose names Seraphine would never know, stood by the door with their hands folded and their mouths shut. The footage played once, then again, then a third time. Ronan didn't speak during any of the viewings. He watched the way Graham moved, the performance of it, the rehearsed casualness, the smile deployed like a weapon. He watched the way the man's eyes tracked the camera positions, confirming that he understood the architecture of his own provocation. After the third viewing, Ronan leaned back in his chair. "He's not stupid," Declan said. "No," Ronan agreed. "He's not stupid. He's desperate. There's a meaningful distinction." "What's the play?" Ronan was silent for a long time. The monitor still glowed with the frozen image of Graham Ashford's face, handsome, confident, and entirely hollow. "Don't touch him," Ronan said finally. Declan's eyebrows rose. "Sir?" "I said don't touch him." "Not yet. Not physically. Not visibly. Do nothing that leaves a mark or a trail." "Then what?" Ronan stood. He buttoned his jacket, a gesture so habitual it was nearly unconscious. He looked at the frozen image on the screen one more time. "Has she seen this footage?" "No, sir." "Good. I'll tell her myself." He turned toward the door, then paused, looked back at the screen, at the peonies sitting on the concierge desk, like a white flag that was actually a declaration of war. "Find out everything about his business structure," Ronan said. "Every fund, every investor, every board he sits on, every deal he's closing, every deal he's trying to close, every regulatory filing, every pending audit, every favor he owes, and every favor owed to him." Declan pulled out a notebook. "Timeline. 48 hours. And after that," Ronan looked at him. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, clear, pale, and absolutely without warmth. "After that," he said, "I'm going to take his life apart. And I'm going to do it so quietly, he won't realize it's happening until there's nothing left." He walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And Declan, a man who had worked for Ronan Vale for 11 years, who had seen things that would make most people lose their appetites permanently, felt a chill settle across the back of his neck. Because Ronan Vale did not make threats. He made plans, and his plans always worked. Ronan told Seraphine about the lobby visit the following morning. He did it carefully, not in the kitchen. The kitchen had become something else now, something that belonged to both of them, and he didn't want to contaminate it with Graham's presence. Instead, he asked her to come to the study. The study was on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Dark wood bookshelves lined with volumes that had actually been read. Cracked spines, pencil annotations in the margins, passages underlined with the focused intensity of a man who treated philosophy like survival literature. Seraphine had never been in this room. She stood near the door, uncertain. "Please sit," Ronan said. He was already seated, behind the desk this time, a gesture she instinctively read as professional. He was creating distance, Dorset structure, a framework for the information he was about to deliver, so it wouldn't feel like an ambush. She sat. He told her, plain language, no embellishment, no softening. Graham came to the lobby. He asked for her by a false name. He left flowers. He made sure the cameras saw him. Seraphine listened without expression. When he finished, she said, "The peonies." Ronan waited. He always brought white peonies. Her voice was flat. After every episode, after every time things escalated. The next day, white peonies, like a receipt, proof of purchase. She looked at Ronan. "He's telling me he still owns the transaction." Ronan leaned forward slightly. "Do you believe that?" "No." Her voice was steady. "But the part of me he built, the version of me that lived inside his rules for 2 years, she believes it. And she's loud right now." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to another human being. And Ronan, a man who dealt in silence and calculation and the precise application of force, sat with that honesty like it was a living thing he had been handed. and he did not drop it. "I've heard louder," he said quietly. It wasn't a platitude. It wasn't reassurance. It was a statement of fact from a man who had spent his life in rooms with the loudest, most dangerous voices in the city. And somehow, that was more comforting than any comfort she had ever been offered. That evening, something small happened that Seraphine would remember for the rest of her life. She was in the kitchen, her kitchen, as she had begun to think of it, though she would never say so out loud, finishing the last of the dinner service preparation. The head chef had left. The sous chef had gone. It was her, and the quiet and the rhythm of a well-organized space. She heard the study door open above, footsteps on the internal staircase, the soft descent of a man who moved through his own home like a guest, quietly, as if the space might object to his presence. Ronan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was carrying two things, a cup of tea, and a book. He set the tea on the counter beside her. Green tea, the kind she kept in the back of the pantry, the kind she thought no one noticed she drank, because she always used the same cup and always washed it immediately. He noticed. He set the book beside the tea. She glanced at it. The title was about rebuilding personal identity after coercive relationships. Bullshit. The author was a clinical psychologist. The cover was plain, understated, the kind of book that looked like it had been chosen by someone who had actually read the reviews. He didn't say anything. He didn't explain. He simply set down the tea and the book and turned to leave. Ronan. It was the first time she had used his first name, not Mr. Vale, not Sir, just his name, spoken softly, with a weight that surprised them both. He stopped, turned halfway. His profile was lit by the kitchen's amber glow. Sharp jaw, strong nose, a mouth that was accustomed to silence. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, once, and left. And Seraphine stood in the kitchen with her tea and her book and the lingering scent of his cologne. Cedar, something warm, something clean, and she understood that something had shifted. He was not her employer. He was not her rescuer. He was something she didn't have her word for yet. But the shape of it felt like shelter. The breaking point, when it came, didn't arrive with drama. It arrived at 2 in the morning, on a Thursday, when Seraphine woke up in the small staff apartment on the 38th floor and couldn't breathe. The nightmare was the same one, the one where Graham was standing at the foot of her bed, holding her phone, scrolling through her messages with that expression, that calm, paternal, terrifying expression, while saying, "You've been lying to me again." In the dream, she always tried to speak, and in the dream, no sound came out. She sat up in the dark, sweat on her collarbone, hands shaking, heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. She pressed her palms flat against the mattress and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the way her therapist had taught her, before she could no longer afford a therapist. By the count of 30, her breathing had slowed. By the count of 60, she could see the room clearly. It dated. By the count of 90, she was standing in the kitchen. She hadn't planned to go there. Her feet had simply carried her down the service corridor, through the security door, into the one room in this building that felt like hers. The one room where the counters were clean, Dodim because she made them clean, where the spices were organized because she organized them, where the silence was hers because she had chosen it. She stood at the sink. She turned on the faucet. She let the water run over her hands, warm, then hot, then almost too hot, because the heat was real and the nightmare was not, and she needed her body to know the difference. She didn't hear him come in, but she felt the air change. "You're shaking." His voice came from the doorway, not behind her. He had learned that standing behind her triggered something. He stood to the side, visible in her peripheral vision, giving her the choice to look or not. She looked. Ronan was wearing a dark t-shirt and gray sweatpants. His hair was messy, actually messy, not styled messy. His feet were bare. He looked for the first time since she had known him, like a human being instead of an institution. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't mean to wake. You didn't. He stepped into the kitchen. I was awake. She didn't ask why. People like Ronan Vale didn't sleep easily. She knew that without being told. The same way, she knew that the books on Stoic philosophy weren't academic exercises, but survival tools. He pulled the same chair from the island, set it in the same spot. She sat without being asked. He didn't sit on the counter this time. Instead, he did something that Seraphine Hale would replay in her memory for years, decades, every time she needed to remember what it looked like when strength chose to be gentle. He knelt, not dramatically, not performatively. He simply lowered himself to one knee in front of the chair where she sat, so that he was looking up at her instead of down, so that she was, for once, the taller one, the one with the higher ground. His hands rested on his own knee, not reaching for her, not touching, present. Tell me, he said, and she broke, not the quiet breaking from the first night, the controlled leak, the single tear, the held-together composure of a woman who had learned to cry without being heard. This was different. This was the sound of a dam failing, the sound of every wall she had built over 2 years of psychological captivity. Every defense, every coping mechanism, every carefully constructed fiction of being okay, crumbling simultaneously. She sobbed, deep, wrenching, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. She pressed her hands over her face and bent forward in the chair, and the sound that came out of her was not crying. It was mourning. Mourning the years she had lost. Mourning the person she had been before Graham Ashford had taken her apart, piece by piece, and reassembled her into something that existed only in relation to him. And Ronan stayed. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He didn't try to fix it, or minimize it, or redirect it. He simply knelt there. This man who controlled empires, who commanded fear, who could end careers and rearrange lives with a single phone call, and he bore witness. That was the word. Witness. He let her pain exist without trying to manage it, and that act of quiet, immovable presence, was the most profoundly radical thing anyone had ever done for her. When the storm finally passed, it took 12 minutes, though it felt like an hour. Seraphine lifted her head. Her face was swollen, her eyes were red, her hands were trembling, and Ronan was still there, kneeling, waiting. His expression unchanged except for a softness around the eyes that she had never seen before, a crack in the foundation of the most controlled man she had ever met. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. Not a tissue, a handkerchief, white cotton, monogrammed, the kind of small, old-fashioned detail that revealed more about a person than any biography. He held it out. She took it. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice was raw, scraped clean, like wood after sandpaper. "Something I haven't told anyone." He waited. "I didn't leave because I was brave." She shook her head. "Everyone thinks that. My mother thinks I finally found my courage. My one friend who still speaks to me thinks I hit a limit. But that's not what happened." She looked at him, directly, without flinching. "I left because I was terrified of what I was becoming. I was starting to agree with him, Ronan. I was starting to believe that I was the problem, that I was unstable, that I was ungrateful, that the way he treated me was normal, and everything else was the lie." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I left because I could feel myself disappearing, and I was more afraid of becoming nothing than I was of anything he could do to me." The kitchen was absolutely silent. Ronan's hand, the one resting on his knee, moved for the first time. Slowly, deliberately. He extended it, palm up, on the armrest of her chair. An offering, not a demand. She looked at his hand for a long time. She knew what it meant to take it. Not romantically, not yet, that was still distant, still forming, but structurally, symbolically. To place her hand in the hand of a man who had power over her circumstances was an act of trust that required every ounce of courage she had rebuilt in the months since leaving Graham. Orsia, she put her hand in his. His fingers closed gently. Not tight, just enough to say, I'm here. You can let go now. No one claims ownership over something with a pulse, he said quietly. You are not a thing to be owned. You are not a reputation to be managed. You are a person. And you left because you had more fight in you than he could beat out. He paused. That's not weakness, Seraphine. That's the only kind of bravery that matters. She held his hand. She didn't let go for a long time. And he didn't pull away. After that night, the architecture of their relationship changed in ways that were invisible to everyone except the two of them. It wasn't dramatic. There was no declaration, no sudden shift in behavior. Ronan didn't start appearing at her side, or sending gifts, or making grand gestures. He was not that kind of man, and she was not the kind of woman who would have trusted grand gestures. What changed was the quality of the silence between them. Before, their silence had been professional, the empty space between employer and employee, filled with nothing because nothing was expected. Now their silence was inhabited. It had texture, warmth, a gravitational pull that neither of them acknowledged out loud. He began eating in the kitchen. Not every night, but some nights when the house was quiet and the work was done, he would appear with a plate and sit at the island and eat while she cleaned. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they sat in companionable quiet for 20 or 30 minutes, and the only sounds were the clink of his fork and the soft rhythm of her organizing the pantry. When they did talk, it was about everything, except what was happening between them. He told her about growing up in South Boston, about his father, who had been a longshoreman, and then something else, something Ronan didn't name, but that left bruises on his mother's arms. About his mother, Eileen, who had raised 4 boys in a 3-bedroom apartment, and who still called him every Sunday and asked if he was eating enough. She doesn't know what I do, he said once, staring at his plate. Not really. She knows enough to pray harder than most mothers. But she doesn't know the details. Would she forgive you? Seraphine asked. If she did. He was quiet for a long time. My mother is the only person in the world whose forgiveness would cost me something. Seraphine understood that. She understood it completely. And she told him things too. About her father, a literature professor who had died when she was 16. About her mother, who had retreated into grief and never fully returned. About her graduate program in behavioral psychology, the one she had given up when Graham convinced her she didn't need a career because he would take care of everything. I was studying coercive control, she said, and the irony was so sharp it could have drawn blood. I was writing a thesis on the psychological tactics of emotional abuse, and I didn't recognize it when it happened to me. That's not a failure of intelligence, Ronan said. That's the nature of the thing. It doesn't work on people who aren't intelligent. It works precisely because you're smart enough to rationalize what's happening. She stared at him. Where did you learn that? He didn't answer directly, but his eyes went to a place she couldn't follow. Some interior landscape shaped by experiences he didn't share. She didn't push. She was learning that Ronan Vale's silences were not voids. They were rooms, and some rooms had doors that opened only from the inside. On the 14th day, Ronan left the penthouse at 8 in the evening, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. He told no one where he was going. Declan drove. The black sedan moved through Midtown like a blade through water, smooth, silent, certain. They pulled up to a private club on the Upper East Side, the kind of place that didn't have a sign, didn't advertise, and didn't exist on any map accessible to the general public. Ronan entered alone. Graham Ashford was already inside, seated at a corner table with a glass of Macallan 25 and the easy confidence of a man who believed he was the most powerful person in any room he entered. He wasn't. He just didn't know it yet. Ronan sat across from him. No handshake, no book greeting, no pretense. Graham recognized him, of course. Everyone in certain financial circles knew Ronan Vale, not by reputation as a criminal, because Ronan had spent years ensuring that his legitimate business profile was immaculate. But as a restaurateur, an investor, a man with impeccable taste and connections that reached into places most people couldn't imagine. Ronan, Graham smiled, the charm offensive, deployed immediately. Muscle memory. This is unexpected. Can I get you a drink? No. Graham's smile dimmed by approximately 1 degree. All right, what can I do for you? Ronan set a plain manila folder on the table. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. There's a woman, Ronan said, his voice barely above a murmur, who used to be in your life. She isn't anymore. And you seem to be having difficulty understanding the permanence of that situation. Graham's expression flickered. Just once. A micro-expression that lasted less than a second. Surprise, followed by assessment, followed by the careful reconstruction of his public face. I'm not sure what you're referring to, he said smoothly. Yes, you are. Ronan didn't blink. You hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago. You visited a residential building on East 74th Street 9 days ago. You left flowers. You sent a text message from a rotating number. These are facts. I'm not interested in your interpretation of them. Graham set down his glass. His smile was gone now, replaced by something harder. Sharper. The real face beneath the mask. She's my fiancée, he said. She's your former fiancée. She left you. The engagement ended. The relationship is over. Relationships are complicated, Ronan. People say things in anger. She didn't leave in anger. Ronan's voice dropped a register, not louder, denser. She left in fear, and you know that. You know exactly what you did to her. You know about the financial control, the surveillance, the psychological manipulation, the bruises you left in places no one would see, the threats you made about her reputation. Graham's face went very still. Well, I don't know what she told you, but she didn't have to tell me anything. Ronan placed a single finger on the manila folder. I found out on my own. Inside this folder, Ronan continued, you will find documentation from 3 women, not including Seraphine, who were willing to provide statements about their experiences with you. 2 former girlfriends, 1 former assistant. Their accounts are remarkably consistent. Graham's composure cracked, just slightly, a bead of sweat at the temple. You'll also find records of 17 wire transfers made to a private security firm that specializes in surveillance. Surveillance you used to monitor Seraphine's movements for approximately 14 months. Bank records. Invoices. Email confirmations. Graham opened his mouth. Ronan held up a hand. The gesture was small, but it carried the authority of a man who was not accustomed to being interrupted. You'll find a preliminary filing from the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding irregularities in Ashford Capital's Q3 disclosures. You'll find correspondence from 2 of your board members expressing concern about the firm's due diligence practices. And you'll find a letter, unsigned for the moment, from a senior partner at one of the nonprofits whose board you serve on, requesting your resignation. Graham's face had gone the color of old chalk. This is not a threat, Ronan said. He leaned back. His posture was relaxed. His voice was conversational. Threats are for people who want something and are willing to negotiate. I don't want anything from you, Graham. I'm not offering you a deal. I'm explaining to you what has already happened. What do you mean, already happened? The SEC inquiry was initiated 4 days ago. Your board received the correspondence this morning. The nonprofit has scheduled a vote for next Wednesday. The statements from the 3 women have been archived by my legal team and will be released to selected media contacts if, and only if, you give me reason to release them. Graham stared at him. His hand, resting on the table, was trembling. You can't. I already have. Ronan picked up the folder and placed it in Graham's hands. The question you need to answer now is not whether this is happening. It's whether you want it to stop. And what would that cost me? Ronan smiled. It was the first time he had smiled during the entire conversation, and it was not a warm expression. It was the smile of a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the other person to realize it. It cost you, Seraphine. Completely. Permanently. You will cease all contact. You will withdraw the private investigator. You will delete every recording, every message, every photograph. You will not speak her name. You will not mention her to anyone. You will treat the past 2 years as if they never happened, which, for her sake, is exactly what she wishes they hadn't. He paused. In return, the SEC inquiry will lose momentum. Your board will be reassured. The nonprofit vote will be tabled, and the statements will remain in my vault, where they will stay unless you give me a reason to open it. Graham swallowed. And if I don't agree? Ronan stood. He buttoned his jacket. Then I won't need to destroy your life, Graham. I'll simply step aside and let the evidence do it for me. And trust me, the evidence is much less merciful than I am. He turned and walked toward the door. Vale. Ronan stopped, turned his head. Graham's voice was hoarse, stripped of charm, stripped of polish, stripped of everything except the raw, animal fear of a man who had just realized he was not the predator in this room. Who is she to you? Ronan considered the question for exactly 2 seconds. She's under my roof, he said simply, and I protect what's in my house. He left. The door closed behind him, and Graham Ashford sat alone in a private club with a manila folder in his hands and the slowly dawning understanding that the world he had built, the careful, manicured, publicly perfect world, had just been dismantled by a man who hadn't raised his voice once. The investigator was withdrawn the following day. The rotating phone number went dead the day after that. Within a week, Graham Ashford had quietly resigned from both nonprofit boards. Within 2 weeks, Ashford Capital announced a strategic restructuring, the kind of language that meant the ship was taking on water and the captain was looking for a lifeboat. Within a month, Graham had relocated to London. Seraphine didn't know the details. She never asked, and Ronan never volunteered them. She knew, the way you know things when you live in the orbit of a man like Ronan Vale, that something had happened, something decisive, something that involved the quiet machinery of power operating in rooms she would never enter. But she felt it. The way the weight lifted. The way the air changed. The way her phone stopped feeling like a weapon in her pocket. The day she realized it was over. Truly over. She was standing at the kitchen counter, slicing lemons. And she was humming. She didn't notice she was doing it until she heard herself. A melody, something her father used to sing, something she hadn't remembered in years. She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. Felt the tears come. Different tears this time. Not grief, not fear. Something warmer, relief. The war was over, and she had survived it. 3 weeks after Graham disappeared from her life, Seraphine was standing in Ronan's study. He had asked her to come. Not an order this time. A request, phrased carefully, the way you phrase things when you've learned that the person you're speaking to has had enough of being told what to do. There's something I need to say to you, he had said that morning in the kitchen. When you're ready. She was ready that evening. The study was different at night. The bookshelves were softened by lamplight. The windows showed the city in its evening gown, a million lights spread across the darkness, like scattered coins. Central Park was a pool of shadow in the center of it all. Ronan stood by the window. Not behind his desk, not in a position of authority. Just a man, standing in his own home, looking at the city he had grown up in and fought for and taken pieces of. One calculated move at a time. She stood near the door, the same spot as before. But her posture was different now. Straighter, more present. The woman who had cowered against the pantry shelves with a threatening text on her phone was still inside her, but she was no longer in charge. Sit, he said, then caught himself. If you want. She chose to stand. He almost smiled. I need you to know something, Ronan said. He turned from the window to face her. His hands were in his pockets, a rare posture for him, one she had never seen. It looked almost vulnerable, like a man reaching for something that wasn't in his usual inventory. Graham Ashford is no longer a threat to you. The details are mine to keep, and I'll keep them, but the outcome is permanent. He will not contact you. He will not look for you. He will not speak of you. Seraphine nodded slowly. I know. What you may not know, Ronan continued, is that I didn't do it for you. She blinked. What? I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because a man in my position has the ability to correct certain imbalances, and choosing not to use that ability when confronted with cruelty would make me complicit in the cruelty. I did it because I have a rule, an absolute rule, and he broke it. He paused. His eyes held hers. But I need you to understand why I'm telling you this. Because I want you to know that you owe me nothing. Not gratitude, not loyalty, not whatever you think this is. He gestured vaguely between them. The gesture was so uncharacteristically imprecise that Seraphine felt something crack open in her chest. You don't stay here because I scared him away, he said. You don't stay here because you feel indebted, or because you're afraid of what happens if you leave, or because you think this is another version of the same cage with a nicer view. His voice dropped. If you stay because you feel safe. Not because of me. Because of yourself. Because you chose it. The room was very quiet. The city hummed below them, 42 stories down, and Seraphine Hale stood in the doorway of Ronan Vale's study and felt, for the first time in years, the full weight of being offered a choice by someone who genuinely intended to honor whatever she decided. She didn't speak immediately. She needed the silence, not the survival silence, the kind she had used with Graham. The silence that was a shield and a submission and a disappearance. This was a different silence. The kind that exists when you are standing at the edge of something new and you need a moment to find the words. She thought about the past 4 months, about the kitchen and the tea and the book and the chair he always pulled out for her and the counter he sat on so she wouldn't have to look up. About the handkerchief and the kneeling and the hand held open like an offering. She thought about the version of herself that had walked into this building, hollowed out, running, invisible, and the version of herself standing here now, scarred, yes, changed, yes, but solid, present, occupying her own shape again. Ronan had not done that. She had done that, but he had given her the space to do it, the room, the quiet, the extraordinary disciplined restraint of a man who had every kind of power and had chosen, deliberately and consistently, not to use it on her. I want to say something, she said. He nodded. Data, you asked me that first night who did this to me. I remember. The answer was Graham, but that's not the whole answer. She took a breath. The whole answer is that I did this to me too. Not the abuse, that was him, but the staying, the silence, the disappearing. I participated in my own erasure because I was too afraid to be loud. She stepped forward. One step, two. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. And I need you to know that I'm not standing here because you saved me. I'm standing here because I saved myself. And you, her voice wavered just slightly. You were the first person who treated me like someone worth saving. Ronan's composure shifted. Not dramatically. Not visibly to anyone who wasn't standing 3 feet away, watching his face by lamplight in a room on the 42nd floor. But Seraphine saw it. A softening, a fracture in the granite, a glimpse of the man behind the machinery. You are worth saving, he said quietly. You always were. She closed the distance between them, not him, her. She reached up and placed her hand on his jaw. Her fingers were steady, not trembling, not shaking, not uncertain. She felt the warmth of his skin, the slight roughness along his jawline, the way his breath caught when she touched him. And she kissed him, slow, intentional, earned, not a kiss born from gratitude or desperation, or the heated chaos of a dark romance narrative. A kiss born from choice, from clarity, from the deliberate, conscious decision of a woman who had spent 2 years having her choices taken away, choosing, finally, freely, completely, to step towards someone instead of away. Ronan's hands came up, one to the small of her back, one to the side of her face. He held her the way you hold something you've been afraid to reach for, carefully, reverently, with the full awareness that it might be taken away. The kiss lasted 7 seconds. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "I've never been more sure of anything." He closed his eyes, and Seraphine Hale, who had survived psychological captivity, who had rebuilt herself from fragments, who had learned to slice lemons with precision and brew tea in silence and exist in the margins of other people's lives, stood in the arms of a man who terrified cities and felt, for the first time, what it was like to be held without being trapped. Months later, the kitchen. Late night, steam rising, not from the sink this time, but from 2 cups of tea sitting side by side on the counter. Seraphine was standing at the island, going over notes. She had re-enrolled in her graduate program, behavioral psychology, coercive control, the thesis she had abandoned 2 years ago. Ronan had said nothing about it when she told him. He had simply nodded in that way of his, and the following week, she found a new laptop on the kitchen counter with a note in his handwriting, "For the thesis R." She was studying when she heard it, the heavy kitchen door, closing, slow, controlled, click, footsteps. She didn't flinch, she didn't tense. She turned and she smiled, and there he was, standing in the doorway of his own kitchen in a t-shirt and bare feet, his hair messy from sleep, his eyes soft in the amber light. He walked to her. He stood beside her. He picked up his cup of tea and took a sip, and then he looked around the kitchen, at the clean counters, and the organized pantry, and the steam curling toward the ceiling, and he said, "No more ghosts in my house." She leaned into him. His arm came around her, easy, natural, the way gravity works, invisible until you stop fighting it. "No more ghosts," she agreed. The city hummed below. The steam rose, and in a kitchen on the 42nd floor of a building in Manhattan, in the home of a man who had built his life on control and found his match in a woman who had survived being controlled, there was silence.